I'd like to thank our first speaker for coming, Pnina Savery. Pnina is a graduate of the Advanced Tanakh program at the Matan Women's Institute for Torah Studies in Jerusalem. She holds a master's degree in Jewish history from the Hebrew U and is a qualified tour guide at Yad Vashem. She's currently a participant in the Chief Rabbi's Ma'ayan program and teaches English at Menorah High School. Welcome, Pnina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Five Stones for hosting and to Rebbetzin for inviting me to speak. I should also add that my claim to fame is that I'm also David Nathan's sister. And I feel like, for those of you who don't know that, you probably need to before I begin speaking, so you can, make whatever comments you need to afterwards to him. I'd also like to say that our words of Torah tonight should be in the schut of there being a peaceful solution to the situation in Ukraine, and that the Jewish people, the Jewish communities of Ukraine should also be protected and kept safe. So I want to begin with a story. A few years ago, when I was living in Israel, I spent Purim in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, and I went to the shul of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital to hear the Megillah being read. And as I turned to leave at the end of hearing the Megillah, a woman who was dressed in quite a Hasidic set of clothes and who was speaking Hebrew with a Hasidic accent, which handed me a bag of goodies, wished me Purim Sameach, happy Purim, and turned and left. And I thought, wow, this is really, really lovely. A total stranger has given me a gift. Now, obviously, she was fulfilling one of her 4 Purim mitzvot of Mishlach Manot, of giving a food parcel to another Jew. And she was just trying to get through her mitzvot. She was obviously preoccupied. The reason she was in the hospital for, whether it was she was ill, someone else was ill. But she made me feel really happy that someone, a total stranger from a different background, okay, she was Jewish, but from a very different type of Jewish life, had given me a present. It made me feel really, really happy. We know on Purim there are 4 main mitzvot. We have to hear the Megillah being read twice, in the evening and in the morning. We have a festive meal, a Purim Suda, in the afternoon. We give matanot le'evyonim, that's charity, tzedakah to poor people, and we give mishlach manot, food parcels. And really, when we think about what we spend our time on in the run-up to Purim, probably it's the mishlach manot, the food parcels, that take up most of our time. I'm sure many of you have already been asked by the PTA to donate to the staff mishlach manot, and maybe the more creative among us are already planning how we're going to have something themed with our children's costumes. I know I managed one year to do a Minnie Mouse theme. My daughter's dressed up as Minnie Mouse and all my food was themed. I'm never doing that again. It was a lot of work. I'm not quite that creative. And on the day itself, we spend a lot of time delivering Mishlach Manot. I'm assuming that the traffic in Bournemouth is not quite as bad, but if you have to go to Hendon or Golders Green, it's bad here too. Okay, well, it's definitely worse. This year, by the way, is a warning to anyone going there. There's going to be roadworks between Golders Green and Hendon, so really avoid it. So we spend a lot of time on it, but what I want to try and get to the bottom of with you tonight is what is the purpose of Mishlach Manot and what are we really meant to be thinking or achieving when we do it? So I'm going to go through with you 3 different things to try and answer this question. First of all, we'll look at the source of the mitzvah itself in the Megillah. Secondly, we'll try to understand it within the wider context of the Purim story. And finally, we'll try and tie it all together and come out with a message for us today. So to look at the original source, the mitzvah of Mishlach Manot is in the Megillah itself, at the end in chapter 9. Mordechai and Esther write out how we should keep Purim and celebrate our victory in future years. And they mention feasting and merrymaking, that's our Purim Suda. They mention tzedakah, that's our matanot le'evyonim, and they mention mishlach manot, which is our food packages. They say, and they mention all these things. So we know that it's really there at the source. Mordechai and Esther said that this is how we should keep Purim. But really, I still, that doesn't really help us understand what the purpose is, especially when we think that we're not just giving people food because they need food. That's what we're doing with the Matanot LeEvyonim, because in fact, when you give that Purim charity, it's meant to be for people who cannot afford to make their own festive meal, and you give the money so that those people can buy food and eat it on Purim itself. Now, I remember back when I was in Sem, and we were very preoccupied with keeping every law really as you should, just as good Sem girls and yeshiva boys are. And we asked our rabbi, how much should we give for Matanot LeEvyonim? And he told us we should give the amount that would cover a meal. So he said, however much a shawarma and a soft drink is, that's how much you should give. Back then it was about 20-25 shekels. I'm sure now it's much, much more. But that's the idea of Matanot LeEvyonim. So if we're giving that tzedakah for people who need the food to eat on Purim itself, what again is Mishlach Manot all about? So we've looked at the mitzvah in the original source, and we've probably asked now our questions are even greater than they were, right? You know, we haven't found any answers. So now let's try and understand it within the wider context of the Purim story. So at the beginning of the Purim story, Haman, the villain, the arch enemy of the Jewish people, comes to Achashverosh with his claim against the Jewish people. He really doesn't like the Jews, and he asks the king for permission to wipe them out. And he says something really interesting. Okay, I'll read to you the Hebrew if I can find it here. Okay, chapter 3, verse 8. It says, there is one people who are scattered and dispersed among the nations, in all the provinces of your empire, and their laws are different from all other nations, and they don't keep the laws of the king. And for the king, it's not worth it for you to leave them, let them be. So he basically makes two claims. One, that the Jewish people are scattered everywhere. And number two, that they don't keep your laws. Now, I understand the second one. I understand that it's a problem. I mean, I'm not saying it was true, but it's a problem for the king that the Jewish people aren't keeping the laws of the land. But why does he come with the first claim? Why does he say it bothers the Jews are everywhere? Why does that matter? So I guess for someone who's as anti-Semitic as Haman, seeing a Jew every time he walks down the street really, really bothers him. But still, that can bother him. But for him to make that claim to the king seems a bit petty, doesn't it? I've never really quite understood why he has to say that. So I want to try and suggest a different reading of this verse. There's an idea in the Megillah that God's name never appears. And instead, every time it says king, melech, as opposed to king Achashverosh, it's referring to God. So if we think that, keep that in mind, and we look at this verse again, we can understand it in a different way, at least the end of the verse, when he says, V'datei hamelech einam osim, and the laws of the king they're not doing. Maybe he wasn't talking about the human king Achashverosh, but God, that the Jewish people at the time are not keeping the Torah, and that perhaps Haman on one level is saying this criticism of the Jewish people that they weren't keeping the Torah. So maybe if we can look at the first part of the verse with that in mind too, that when he says they were scattered and dispersed among the empire, not that this was a problem for Haman only, but this was a problem for God. Because not only were they maybe scattered geographically, but they had a lack of unity. There was no cohesion, no sense of unity and community amongst the Jewish people at the time of the Purim story. And just to add a further proof there, the word mufurad, dispersed, comes from the Hebrew word lahafrid, to divide, and that appears in only one other place in Tanakh, well, two other places, both in the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, in the same context of alienating a friend, showing us that this word is hinting to us this context of negative personal relationships. The Jewish people at the time of the Purim story were divided. So if we try and go back now to our question about Mishlach Manot, maybe they're not just there to give food to people who need food, because really they don't. And when you walk into your rabbi's house and put down your beautiful package with its ribbon and its cellophane next to maybe 30 others that look exactly the same, and you're thinking he really doesn't need this food. we're not doing it just to give food, we're doing it to create a sense of unity, a sense of community. Just like that Hasidic woman in Shaarei Tzedek, when she handed me that Mishloach Manot, it made me feel like I belonged, that I was part of the Jewish people. And that is what we're trying to do when we give Mishloach Manot. And it's not just me that says this, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz from the 1500s, who is famous for having written Lechad Odi that we sing beautifully on Friday night at Kabbalat Shabbat. He also says this, that Mishloach Manot, the primary aim is to create a feeling of goodwill amongst the Jewish people. So just to finish, I would like to perhaps suggest, if I may, that this year in 2022, when we're planning our Mishloach Manot, maybe we can try and branch out. I'm not saying don't give to the regular people, that might cause more broigus and more. But, maybe to think of one extra person, maybe a neighbor who, doesn't really celebrate Purim with everyone and might really appreciate receiving a package, or perhaps someone who you've got a bit of an icy relationship with because maybe did you scratch their car in the school playground or did they scratch yours? I'm sure we can all think of someone that I don't think you can ever go wrong with knocking on someone's door with a smile and a beautiful food package. So I think that if we can keep this in mind as we come up to Purim this year, maybe we can really try and create a sense of unity and community among the Jewish people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That's good. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here this evening, getting to know my way around Bournemouth. I'm really just following ways, to be honest. It's very nice to be here in the lead up to Purim. And it proved exciting, but just on a serious note, I thought it would be nice if we learn this evening with the Ukraine in mind and hope that our learning does something good for the situation there. And on that note as well, actually on my way over here, I was on the phone to my brother who lives in Israel, and he told me about a situation that's breaking there, which I think they're keeping out of the media for the time being, but something I thought also we should have in mind. So the Rav of his community, he's a guy called Rabbi Rav Pedram, and he was out for the day. He got home and his wife wasn't home, but he didn't think anything of it. And then towards evening, she still wasn't home. He started phoning her and she's not answering her phone. And then he starts calling around friends, neighbors, family. No one's heard from her. So he's starting to get a bit nervous. And then his phone rings and it's his Arab builder, a guy called Iman, who's been working for him for the last couple of weeks, doing some work at the house. And he says, I'm just phoning to tell you I'm not coming into work for the next few days. I've got to go home for my uncle's wedding. He said it, so Rav Pedram said, it's fine, don't worry. I'm in the middle of something, I can't really talk now. So he says to him, what are you in the middle of? He's like, it's nothing, it's just a family situation, but that's fine. And so the man says to him, I know what's going on, it's about your wife, isn't it? So he's like, sorry, what are you talking about? So he says, I didn't tell you, I'm going home for my uncle's wedding, and I didn't tell you who my uncle is. My uncle's actually Ayatollah Khamenei, and he asked me to infiltrate a Jewish home and take a woman to bring back to him because he wanted to marry a Jewish woman, and I've got her now in Gaza. We're about to get on a flight, and if anyone comes after us, then he said he's going to go nuclear. So they're keeping it out of the media for now because they need to do something. I guess I'll try to do something under the radar, but they've asked for people to please have her name in mind. So her name is Esther Bas Avichail. So if you want to include her in your thoughts. Okay, before you get your phones out, I'm messing with you. It's not true. Deep breath, it's not true. It is kind of true. It is kind of true. Does anyone know who is Esther Bas Avichail? Oh, Esther. And Rav Pedram is an anagram of Mordechai. Rav Pedram is an anagram of Mordechai, and Iman the builder is Haman. So why did I mess with you like this? I'm not just a psychopath. Not just because of that. Why did I tell this story in that way? Because when we hear Purim, we're like, yay, Purim, so exciting. We dress up and there's costumes and there's food and there's nash and it's exciting. And it is all that. It is very exciting. But if you only look at that, because we're telling, that's the reason we feel like that is because we tell the story of Purim from the point of view of the Jewish people. And for the Jewish people, it's a really exciting story because yet again, people were trying to kill us and we survived and we won and they lost, so we celebrate. It's like every other Yom Tov that we have, right? But from the point of view of the heroine of the story, Esther, this is not a fairy tale. This is not a happily ever after. It's actually a really awful story from her point of view. So let's start. The story begins with King Ahasuerus, who was the king of the whole of the kingdom of Babylon, which was huge. It was basically the whole world at the time was Babylon, and he was the king. He'd conquered it and taken over from the previous king. And going back a couple of kings of Babylon, there was King Nebuchadnezzar, who you might remember because he is the king who came in and conquered Israel. He destroyed our first temple and he sent us all into exile. And Ahasuerus came, he conquered the kingdom, and he is now ruling everything. And at the time, there was a prophecy given to Jeremiah, to Uriah, and he was told, he was the prophet at the time, and he was told that this exile was only going to last for 70 years. And Ahasuerus, he did this calculation where he thinks 70 years are up, but actually he miscalculated. He was counting from the time of the first exile. There was an elite group of Jews. Included in this group was Mordechai and the king of the country, King Jeconiah of Jerusalem. They all went ahead, but it was actually 10 years prior to the destruction of the temple. So they got to Babylon, they set up the Jewish community of Babylon. They probably had a United Synagogue there, they had a Chabad there, they had it all going on. And 10 years later, everyone else came because then the temple had been destroyed. And Mordechai, he was a really important person. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, which I guess is like almost like the chief rabbi. And so the beginning of the story is King Ahasuerus, he makes this feast, he's miscalculated, and he's celebrating because the Jews are still in exile. Hashem hasn't remembered them, he hasn't taken them back to Israel, and he's got them for keeps, so he thinks. So he throws this big feast, and he gets a bit carried away, a bit drunk, and his first wife, Vashti, does something to upset him, and he decides off with her head, and he kills her. And then he probably wakes up in the morning with a giant hangover and thinks, hang on a minute, that was a bit rash. Don't know what I was thinking there. The wine got the better of me. He's like, I actually do need a queen. So he got launched with his whole parade of women where he's recruiting for his next queen. And everyone, all the maidens of all the lands come and he tried them out one after another. He's looking for this new queen and none of them fit the bill. And then there's like a scene shift and we get told this story about this guy called Mordechai. And in our very introduction to him, we're told Mordechai is one of these first group of Jews that came from the exile and that he came to Babel. And along with him, he's also got this young cousin, Esther. She's his first cousin. She was orphaned from birth. It's a very sad story. She lost both her parents. She was an orphan from birth. So he's a nice guy. He takes her under his wing. And not only that, he brings her up. And when she becomes older, he actually, according to the Gemara and according to Rashi, he marries her. And she actually becomes the chief Rebbetzin. So actually, the story I told you at the beginning wasn't so far from the truth, because actually, she is captured. She's the wife of like the most prestigious Jew in the land. She's captured with all these other women, taken against her will, held in a palace, be forced to marry the equivalent of Ayatollah Khomeini. He is the king of the kingdom that destroyed our temple. That's like a horrific situation to find herself in. And actually, we think of the story as being quite a short story because we read it in about 45 minutes. But actually, it spans about 11 years. And it's only 5 years into this story that she suddenly has an inkling of what she's doing there. She must be having, over the course of these years, these moments of like, oh my goodness, what a weird turn my life has taken. What, a minute ago, I was like, the Rebbetzin of the community, and everyone was coming to me with their questions, and I was giving out the chicken soup and everything. And now I'm stuck in this palace, being married to King Ahasuerus. It's such a crazy situation. Why am I here? And she's, holding on to her faith, hoping that things are going to get better. It will all be resolved, and that eventually she can go back to her first husband, Mordechai. And she's holding out hope, but then things take a turn for the worse. And this guy Haman comes along, and he comes up with this plot to kill the Jews. And Ahasuerus doesn't know that Esther's Jewish because she hasn't told him. He also doesn't know that Haman's killing the Jews because Haman hasn't told him who he's planning on killing. He just says, these people, I'm going to kill them. And Ahasuerus says, yes, sure, go for it. And Mordechai hears about this story, and he's obviously very upset because he's a Jew and all his people are Jewish, and he's very worried about this unraveling thing that's happening. So he goes to Esther, and he puts on his mourning sackcloth. He's very, very upset, and he fills her in on what's going on. And I think as he's there having this conversation with her, he suddenly has this light bulb moment where he's like, hang on a minute, this is all beginning to make sense. We've been wondering all this time why you're here. Maybe this is it. It's such a weird situation to be in. And now suddenly the Jewish people are under threat and you're married to the king. Let's use this to our advantage. So he says to her, Esther, dear, can you speak to your other husband and try to sort this out for us? Because you're in actually quite a good position to, resolve all this for us. Can you go to King Ahasuerus and ask him to save us? and to not kill all the Jews. And she says, Mordechai, dear, it's a very good idea, but actually that's not how it works. I have to wait till he calls me. Because if you just turn up unannounced and he hasn't summoned you, then it's a bit of an off with your head situation. And like, he's got a form for that. He did do that to his first wife, if you remember. I don't really want to go. And she's like, Esther, you really have to go. Now, it's obvious why she's reluctant. Obviously, she doesn't want the whole off with your head thing. But also, apart from that, there's another factor at play here. According to Jewish law, if you're in the unfortunate circumstance of being taken by another man, which she has been in this case, that's not the end of the Jewish marriage. It's okay because it's something that happened to you, you can control it, and it was against your will. By going to Achashverosh willingly-ish, she would actually be signaling the end of her Jewish marriage. She couldn't then go back to Mordechai afterwards. And she's had that hope all this time that it's all going to be okay in the end and they're all going to live happy ever after, and she's going to go back to Mordechai. And actually what he's asking her isn't just to put her life on the line, but it's actually to put their marriage on the line. And she says to him, do you know what you're asking me to do? And he gives her this bizarre reply. This is what he says to her. He says like this, Im tacharesh tachareshi ba'et hazos. If you stay silent at a time like this, the Jews are still going to be saved from some other place. There's a plan, it's going to be okay. I'm actually not worried about the Jews. But you and your father's household will be destroyed. That's a weird thing to say. And who knows, maybe it's for this very reason that you became the queen. So let's just unpack that a minute. It's a very strange thing that he says to her. He says to her, on the one hand, I'm not worried about the Jews, they're going to be fine. So why is he asking her to put her life on the line if he thinks they're going to be fine anyway? Why is he asking her to do that? And the other thing he says to her, even if they all survive, if you stay silent, you and your father's house are going to die. Again, it's a very strange thing to say to her. It doesn't really make sense. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So she's left with this big dilemma. What should she do? On the one hand, she's got a lot personally riding on this. On the other hand, this is her people. Now remember how we started off, we said Mordechai and Esther, they were actually from the generation that lived through the events that we read about in Eicha, right? Every Tisha B'Av, we read the book of Eicha, and Yirmiyahu describes with graphic detail what happened during that destruction of the first temple. The streets were running with blood, people were dying on the streets of starvation or being killed, the mothers were eating their own children. That's what they've just lived through. They are the survivors. This is the first generation after this. And these are the people whose lives are on the line again. It would be like the equivalent for us of seeing a Holocaust survivor with a gun to their head. And all of this emotion that she feels like she can't let this happen again because these are her people. And this is what she says to Achashverosh, because she does decide to go to him and ask him to save them. But think how she says it. The word she uses is Eicha. She says, Ki eicha chal v'ra'isi, v'ra'a Hashem ta'asami. How can I stand by and let, who's naming it? Go on, do it out loud. No, go on. We do it in the Eicha tune, which probably they had since then. She's lived through every Eicha, every Tisha B'Av since the original one, since the actual destruction. She's not using that term loosely. That is how she feels. This is Eicha again. This is destruction again. And everything's on the line. And also on a personal level, it's her own personal Eicha, because even if there's a good outcome for the rest of the Jews, even if she manages to save them, on a personal level, her marriage is over, which is a horrific thing to put oneself through. A horrible choice to have to make. Now remember also at this moment, we know the ending because we've read the Megillah before, like for years and years and years. We know that there's a happy end for Jew. She doesn't even know if what she's doing, all these risks she's going to take, or even going to come to anything, because she hasn't heard the Megillah before, because it's still new. Right? She's in the Megillah. It's happening. So she doesn't know that's going to have a good ending. So she's, she may be risking all of this for nothing. She also definitely doesn't know that, generations, thousands and thousands of years later are still going to be talking about this moment, what she did all around the world. But, this is the story that we tell on Purim. She doesn't know, right? She doesn't know she's going to be famous. So how does she decide what to do? So there's an expression we have in Hebrew, Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created for me. So what does that mean? We all, in our everyday lives, we have these moments where we just feel like a bit insignificant, like there's this big world and there's little me, and what I do really doesn't really make a difference if I do this, if I don't do this. In the grand scheme of things, what difference do I make? And Bishvalin Ha'olam is telling you the exact opposite. It's saying each and every person has to have the attitude of the world was literally created for you. As in, everything you do makes a huge difference because the world is there for you. You're here for a reason. So the things you do obviously make a big difference, of course. And this is exactly what Mordechai is saying to her in his answer. He suddenly, he has this insight where he says, this is why you're here. We've been wondering, what are you doing in this palace all these years? This is it. This is your moment. If you stay quiet at a time like this, if at the moment that you're trying to make a decision and you're deciding whether or not to do something, and that something is your whole reason for being, if you stay silent, if you don't do what you're meant to do, it's as if you never existed because you missed the whole point of the reason that you're here. That's what he's saying to her. Even if it works out okay and everyone else gets saved, you're going to miss out on your moment. This is you. This is you becoming you. If you don't do it, the Jews will be saved, but you'll miss out on being the one to save them. That's why he says you and your father's household will be destroyed. It'll be as if you never existed. And I think life is really a continuous series of these moments, these split-second decisions sometimes. When it comes to it, somebody's asking you to step up to do something. It could be in your personal life, it could be in your work life, it could be in your community life. And we hesitate. There's a bit of us that thinks, maybe someone else could do it better than me. Maybe I'm not really the right person to do this. Maybe this is an opportunity where you really could make a huge difference to somebody or to lots of somebodies, to a whole community, but you're not sure. There's a bit of you that holds back and thinks, you know what, I'll hang around a little bit. We'll do a case for Sarah thing. If somebody else steps up to the plate, I'll let them have it. Yeah? Oh, wait, right. I'm not going to say no. I wouldn't do that. But I'm not going to say no. But if somebody else does this big project, then great, the project gets done. But you don't realise that you've missed the opportunity to let it be you, to become a better you by getting involved with something. And really your whole existence is a sum total of these very small decisions and experiences that you make. That is life. So Esther gives up everything in this moment. At the end of the Megillah, when we all go home and we're happy and merry and planning our Purim Seder, she is still stuck married to Ahasuerus. But she has a son called Daryavesh with him, and he becomes the next king. And he is the one who sends all the Jews back to Israel, and they rebuild the temple. And that's all thanks to her. So the point of all this is not to ruin your Purim. It's not a sad story. It's definitely a very happy story. And I don't think she's feeling sad at the end of this story either. I'll tell you how I know this. It's a bit meta, this. At the end of the Megillah, Esther is writing the Megillah. In the Megillah, it says Esther writes the Megillah. Why is she doing that? I think there's a real message there. She's saying, you know what? This was not a perfect ending for me, but that's life. Life isn't perfect. Sometimes you have to take decisions, even though they're hard decisions, even though you don't know the outcome. And there's a big fear of not knowing the outcome. Sometimes that can really immobilize us and we're just stuck and we don't do anything and we just let life happen. But she says, look, I wrote my own story. I was the author of my own destiny. It didn't turn out exactly how I would have wanted it, but I'm happy that I did it. I did a good thing. I was the heroine of the story. I saved the people. I didn't know it was for sure going to happen, but I'm so happy that I did it because look, it's all good. And you see, Hashem's very much, he's in the, if you imagine it like a play, she's the main character and he's in the wings. He's just a supporting role. He's not mentioned in the Megillah at all. She is the lead character. And I think she's telling us, when you sit down at the end of your life and you want to write your story, do you want to be the main character? Or do you want to be a sidekick? Do you want to feel like you've really lived your part, your role to the maximum? Or did you kind of just let the other characters take over and life just kind of passed you by? So when deciding whether or not to do something, let's not think about maybe somebody else can do it better, maybe I'll do it another time when I have more time. But remind yourself, Bishvali Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created for you, which means that you're unique. There's only one you, and there's some things that only you can do. That's why you're here. And it takes time to work out what they are, but you need to do them because that's why you're here. And you never know how many people are going to end up reading your story that you're writing. So on that, I wish you all a good Purim.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm sorry about the heart attack at the beginning.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
If it's not in the Megillah, how do you know that Mordechai and Esther were married?
So it's not in the actual wording. So the way she's described, she's called his bus, meaning daughter. And Rashi says, I'll take her bus elo bias. So bayis meaning house, household, and it's kind of a bit of a wordplay, but the Gemara says that was the relationship that they had, that they were in fact married.
How do
You
they
don't
know?
have to read it that way. Well, it's not that, if you think about it in terms of Jewish history, it's quite a recent story by the time they're writing down the Gemara. It's like, it's kind of folklore from not very long ago. So they're kind of on the ground when they're writing it down. You don't have to follow that interpretation. But
Because presumably she didn't write it in the Megillah because Hashverosh would have read that and then known that she was already married.
yeah, but she writes the Megillah after the story takes place.
But he's still alive,
He's still alive.
so she probably doesn't want to come clean about that at that point.
It's a very good situation right now.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, hello everybody. I'm Emma Taylor. For those that don't know, I don't know the official title, a community educator in Boreham Wood and the Rebbetzin Emma Taylor. I also teach history at Haslam Girls and the director of Jewish Living and all other things like that. That's it, I think. Okay, so let's begin. So, as we've now figured out, because we've had two speakers already, we're all doing different things about Purim. And what I'm speaking about is the famous quote from the Gemara, which says, that as Adar comes in, we increase our joy. Now, I've got a few questions on these 5 words. Number one, why the whole month of Adar? We never ever have for any other festival, like the whole of Nisan, we have to eat matzah, or the whole of Kislev, we have to light Hanukkah candles. Why is it that for the whole of Adar, he's got a problem with my question already?
You don't say chocolate in the sun though, so.
That's not to do with eating matzah.
No, but still indulge in
Okay, I'll give it a little bit, but we don't. Okay, fine. But for the whole of Kislev, we don't have Hanukkah candles. And so why is it for the whole month of Adar we have to? This crowd's much more difficult than the last one. Much more. Gosh. I know. I think it's too familiarity breeds. Okay, so now I'm off track. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So it's fine. I really have forgotten what I was going to say. Yeah, the whole month of Adar. So why is it the whole month of Adar we have this concept of increasing joy? Why not specifically only for the days that relate around Purim? Like, what is this whole thing of the whole of Adar? That's our first question. Second question is, what is Simcha? Because it assumes in this little verse that Simcha is something that we all know. So what does Simcha actually mean? And third of all, a third question, which we may not get to, we'll see, is the joy. It says, Mishanichlas Adar Marbin. We have to increase our joy. That implies there's a level of joy there to begin with at the beginning, and then we have to increase it. So how does that fit into this concept of Purim and Simcha and everything that we're going to be talking about today? So let's go to the question number 2 first. The second question is, what is Simcha? Now, if in Judaism, whenever we don't understand a word, we don't just look at the Chumash for the translation. We have to actually find out what the essence, the root of the word is. And we do that by going back to the Torah, the blueprint of our language, and we figure out what the essence, the root of the word is. So the first time the word Simcha is used in the Torah is in context with Moshe and Aaron having a discussion. Moshe is having a discussion with God about Aaron. Moshe is told, you have to be the leader of the Jewish people. And Moshe says, I don't want to. And Aaron, Hashem says, you have to be. And he says, I don't want to be. And they have this whole discussion. And the pasuk actually says, Vayicha af Hashem b'Moshe. Hashem was angry. And Hashem, to get angry, was not such a common thing. So for him to be angry, it was a really, really big deal. And why is it that Moshe did not want to be the leader of the Jewish people? What were the reasons that he gave why he didn't want to be the leader? Number one is the famous answer that he couldn't speak. Aaron was better oratorily, that's the word, with his oratory skills. So why should he not be the leader? Why should it be Moshe? That's the first answer. What's the second answer? Why else did he think that he wasn't the firstborn? And he was worried. He felt that anybody that's a second child will know. My sister always said to me growing up, she hated being my sister because she was known always as Emma's younger sister. So imagine being not the younger sister, but the older brother of someone who was the most famous man in history. So he felt a bit bad for Aaron, that he should be known as Moshe's older brother that didn't quite get the job of being the leader of the people. So he felt a bit bad about this whole situation. So he's fighting with God, and God's saying, and the last bit of the verse is the key to it all. He says, Aaron is coming to meet you, and the last 3 words are, or 2 words, V'sameach belibo, and he is happy. This word simcha, this root that we're talking about today, he's happy in his heart. So what does it mean he's happy in his heart? He's not coming in singing and dancing. When we think of the word simcha, what do we always think about? I'm going to a simcha, I'm going to a wedding, I'm going to a bar mitzvah. Let's sing and dance with multicolored things and like all the UV things and how everything dancing and singing in the big band. That's what I think about a simcha. Aaron's not dancing when he comes to meet Moshe. What's this simcha all about? And the commentators all explain that this simcha is inner contentment with what he is doing in life. Because Hashem is saying here, teaching us all a very fundamental lesson in life. Aaron is very happy doing his job. Aaron is going to be the high priest, and being the high priest is an amazing thing to do. So he's happy with his role, and he's happy that Moshe has his role, and his role is to be the leader. There's no jealousy between Aaron and Moshe because they each have their own specific roles. Everyone's an individual. Everyone has their job. They each have their own skills, strengths, and weaknesses, and therefore there's none of this jealousy between brothers because they're each doing what they should be doing. Therefore, that, according to the commentators, is what real simcha is. Real simcha is not the singing and dancing that we all associate with simcha. Real simcha is knowing I am doing what I need to be doing in life. I am content with where I'm going and the path that I am following. Now, how does that relate to the Purim story? Because when do we see the word simcha in the Purim story? Who remembers? Right at the end. Someone leans it, sure. Here.
Is it when that we're saved? When Haman?
Okay, so what's the verse? We say it every week. Thank you. So we say that the Jews, and the actual official translation is, the Jews enjoyed light and gladness and happiness and honor. The word simcha again. So when is the word, or what does this word simcha refer to over here? What does it refer to? Why are they so happy?
Because the Jews survived.
They were saved, right? So on the surface, we can say that they are probably singing and dancing in the street because they were not going to be killed. They thought they were going to be killed, and now they're not, and now they're really, really happy. That's on the surface. But does that link to the understanding of simcha we just had from Aaron and Moshe? No, that's not what simcha actually means. What was going on in the backstory? The beginning of the Purim story, the Jews were not really doing what they should be doing. The Jews were fraternizing a bit too much with the high polloi, whatever you want to call it, of the Persian society. They were hanging out in the king's palace a bit too much, and they weren't really focusing on their job, which was to serve God and to be a good Jewish people. So if imagine the Jews are here, God's there, they were veering a little bit down over here. Now, what happens in the middle of the story? They think they're going to be killed. And rather than turning to King Ahasuerus, which is what they had been doing for all of this time, well, who are they now turning to? God. They start to pray to him. They fast for 3 days. They pray for 3 days. They bring Esther and Mordechai, all these things, and they start to now, they were here, now they're veering back to where they should be, back to their goal of serving God and being the Jewish people that they should be. And by the end of the Purim story, they now have, I should say, true simcha. Why? Because they are doing what they should be doing. They are content, they're on their path, they know where their goal is, and they're on target to reach their goal. And that is true simcha. And that also links into, we spoke about this verse, comes also in Havdalah, right? We say, why? Why do you say that verse at the end of Havdalah, or end of Shabbat, during the Havdalah? Exactly the same reason. During the week, and I talk for myself, I hope you're all better Jews than me, but during the week, it is very hard to keep on track being Jewish. It's very hard always having God in our thoughts. It's very, very hard continuously trying to be better people every single second of every day, but also busy running around doing this, that, and the other. And sometimes we may veer a little bit off from always focusing totally on God. It's the wrong thing to do, but that's the reality of life. Hopefully not too far, just a little bit each week. And what is Shabbat about? Shabbat is a time when if we actually use Shabbat in the way it's meant to be used, going to shul, having reflective prayer, going with our communities around, having big meals, singing, dancing, whatever it is, if we actually use Shabbat in the way it's meant to be used, then what do we do in our trajectory? We start to go back again to the way we should be. And we start to focus back to the point that we should be focusing on of where we are meant to be as a community, but also as individuals. And therefore, the end of Shabbat, we say, we are the simcha. We are actually content because we know what our job is. We know where we're headed and we know what we should be doing. And therefore, that answers our first question of what is real simcha? Real simcha, we think Purim is a time of obviously frivolity and dancing and singing and dressing up. It's great, it's fantastic. But that is not what the essence of Purim really is about. It's actually about knowing what I should be doing and making sure that I'm on the path to get there. Now, how does this link, again, furthermore to Purim, this whole idea of the month-long simcha that we have compared to other festivals? And Rabbi Sachs talks about this in one of his articles, and it was the most incredible concept. He says that the joy that we often have in life is the singing and dancing joy, but the joy of Purim is not that he calls it therapeutic joy. And he explains that, imagine, think back, because nowadays, especially with the rise of understanding mental health and everything else, if we think of the biblical characters as real people and not just people we read about in storybooks, but actually what it must have been like for Esther to have to go to the pact, what it must have been like for Moshe to have to fight with his brother, all of these things, they're actual real human beings. So now think of what it must have been like for the Jewish people to be told, you are going to be killed on this day. Think of the national trauma that they must have endured. I mean, we don't have to think too far. We just think back 70 years ago to the Holocaust. That's exactly what it was like. They were told they were going to be killed. Now, this national trauma cannot be rectified by just being told, oh, now you're saved. They'll just go away. This was imprinted in our national psyche forever. And that is why it takes the whole month to increase our joy. Because joy is not about singing and dancing at a wedding, which is wonderful and lovely. Maybe we'll do it more and more and more with COVID hopefully going down. We should all have these moments of real simcha. But the true simcha in this context is having this long therapeutic joy of, and I'm going to read a quote that he says, because he says it much better than me. He says, Rabbi Lord Sachs, the Jewish response to trauma is counterintuitive and extraordinary. You defeat fear by joy. You conquer terror by collective celebration. You prepare a festive meal. You invite guests. You give gifts to friends. While the story is being told, you make a loud noise, as not only to blot out the memory of Amalek, but to make a joke out of the whole episode. He says that he learned this from a Holocaust survivor. Some years ago, he wrote a book celebrating life. He says that it was a cheer you up book, and it became a favorite of the Holocaust survivors. One of them, however, told me that a particular passage in the book was incorrect. Commenting on Roberto Benganini's comedy about the Holocaust, Life is Beautiful, I had said that though I agree with his thesis, a sense of humor keeps you sane, that was not enough in Auschwitz to keep you alive. On that, he said, you are wrong. And then he told me his story. He had been in Auschwitz and he had soon realized if he had failed to keep his spirits up, he would die. So he made a pact with another young man that they would both look out for each other and look out for an occurrence each day that they found amusing. At the end of each day, they would tell one another their story and they would laugh together. That sense of humor saved my life. I stood corrected. This man was obviously right. And to me, this is what Purim is about. Purim is about understanding that there is trauma. There are terrible things that happened on a day-to-day basis, and we see it now with what's going on with the world. There's terrible, terrible things. But the joy of Purim is taking that trauma, taking that pain, and being able to live with it in a way that we can find other moments of joy throughout our life. And that, to me, is what the true essence of simcha is. Whatever, may it be finding what personally on my path is, or looking around us and finding good things in the world. Simcha is not about the fleeting singing and dancing, which is wonderful and has its place. But true simcha is finding joy even when we are carrying the pain with us, as they did during the Purim story. So I'm finished. You can now have dessert. Have a good evening.